Welcome to the second installment of Ask the Edge. I'm James Lindner along with Jeremy Smith, and we're going to answer some questions that viewers have ran through Facebook. We'll see how it goes.
Would allowing a second line in Minnesota be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. I think it could be a good thing, so it all depends on how it's done. So I'm a big fan of it if you pay for it. So in my opinion, a second line would be a great thing if you keep the limits the same. I don't think it would greatly impact harvest, but make it worthwhile for the DNR to do it. Don't sell it for $5 extra. Sell it for the cost of an additional license or more, because it's an optional deal, and I think enforcement is possible with it, which has been one of the big kind of stumbling blocks with that topic. So to me, make some money with it, improve habitat, improve fisheries management with that extra money, and allow anglers that opportunity if they choose.
I know I actually have I like the idea of it too. I actually would like it for a variety of different, more personal reasons. More for trolling, obviously. We fish for catfish, we fish for carp, where a lot of times two lines would be an advantage to me. But as you said, I like the idea, because the biggest thing is as far as management goes and how to regulate that and actually increase a little bit on our tax revenue associated to it.
You bet.
Do you have any advice for targeting muskies in heavily pressured lakes?
How many lakes are not heavily fished for muskies?
It's pretty.
That's a good question. I think most of them are actually pretty heavily pressured, including even when you go into Northwest Ontario. You go up on Lake of the Woods, and July 4th, she's a pretty busy spot.
It is. So, I mean, kind of the way, we look at a lot of different approaches to angling is, one, you got to find the fish, and muskies are just low density as a whole. So, in the warm water period for me, whether it's high pressure or no pressure, the inline spinner is just, I think, the best tool of all time to cover lots of water. And then you're just picking up clues along the way where you're seeing signs of life. Obviously, if you see or catch a fish, that's a big deal. And then you can adjust your presentations from there. It seems like if you are targeting pressured fish, really erratic baits can be dynamite. The gliding wrap, it's a bait that's not around anymore, but that side-to-side super erratic motion, it's not a great hooking bait, but it's a tattletale bait. So those baits that go crazy, you can get fish to bite on, you can get them to show themselves, and topwater is another deal under prime time that can get big fish to bite in particular. So to me, it's cover water, figure out where they're at, and then if you're having a tough time getting them, I like really erratic baits to try to get them to bite.
I know I actually know a lot of really good muskie anglers, and Lee Tauken actually had made a really interesting observation, and he referred to topwater baits as almost like a finesse muskie bait. And the reason why he said that is generally associated to the relative speed of the bait. He's been using a lot of like walking baits, and he's really, what is the other tail bait with the...
Like a flap tail.
Flap tail, something really, really slow. And it sits in their strike zone for a long period of time. A lot of the other musky baits, they actually move so quickly through the water column, the fish got to be really active for them to hit it generally. Where these topwater baits, a slower moving topwater sits in that strike zone for a longer period of time. It's definitely one of my go-to baits.
Yeah, for sure. And just to go into that a little bit more, like the finesse muskie thing, that's a big deal. And I think from what I've seen, a lot of muskie anglers have like an approach that I've got kind of one stick with a 130-pound fluorocarbon leader, and I use that to fish every single bait in my tackle box. And today's equipment is, you can really refine stuff, and it's just like bass or walleye fishing. So, we've got rods that are designed to throw 1 pound, 2 pound baits like St. Croix's big rubber rod. But at the same time, we've got the downsizer series, which is great for throwing little baits. And so if you're faced with a really tough situation, like I mentioned, the glide and wrap, but also X-wraps, really erratic baits when you're fishing like a 30-pound titanium leader on 50-pound line with basically a heavy flipping stick, you can make baits do things really, really erratically that a guy throwing that same bait with a 130-pound fluorocarbon leader, the baits just don't perform as well. So matching the lure to the rod and the reel and the line and the leader makes a huge difference in how baits perform, and ultimately can put more fish in the boat for sure.
One thing that I didn't notice, actually we did it we were up on a trip on Lac Seul this last summer, and actually we've been messing around with it quite a bit, but Poseidons, big swim baits, Shadzillas, there's a variety of swimming dogs, these really big soft plastic swim baits. And it was sort of interesting because I was thinking about that in Troy up on this particular trip and said, what's the absolute best muskie bait? A small inline bucktail, whether it be a tandem or a single bladed bait, something that can cover a lot of water really quickly. And what we started doing is messing around with, we took a 1 ounce boxer head jig, a 7-inch big bite swim bait, and put a treble hook on the back of it with a rubber keeper on the hook to keep it in place. But the thing is to fish that swim bait like a spinner bait. And what you're doing is fishing it really, really fast. It's the easiest bait in the world. It's a great figure 8 bait. And we actually ended up, I think Troy and I ended up catching 3 nice fish on it, and have caught a number of fish doing that. But one thing that I'm saying about heavily pressured is fishing baits in ways that the fish haven't seen them move before. And that's one of them. That's sort of an interesting one.
Do you target smallmouth bass through the ice?
Yeah, I mean, I have spent a lot more time largemouth fishing than smallmouth fishing. I used to do a fair amount of it, but from what I saw with smallmouth around central Minnesota and in northwest Ontario is you could land on a giant school of smallmouth, and it could be like almost impossible to get the things to bite. And then at other times you drop, a jig and wrap or a heavy spoon down with a piece of meat, and it was just clunk, 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 clunk. So they seem to be extremely moody, but many times from what I've seen, it's really small baits for the smallmouth, the same stuff you'd fish for bluegills with, and live bait maggots or whatever. Seems like that's been a really good deal, but I don't personally target them all that often through the ice just because of the inconsistency I've seen with catching them. And largemouth are actually really pretty consistent. You can catch those pretty darn easy, but for me with smallmouth, I just haven't spent a ton of time in the last probably 5 years.
Yeah, I've actually, generally when I've caught them accidentally, and actually when we found them in wintering holes, because the fish are really gathered together, a lot of them in a relatively small spot. I know some buddies up in Canada who find them, and they really did not even want to really promote it that much, because in some cases the fish were like below 1 atmosphere. They were like down in 35, 40 foot of water, and they didn't really want people to get on them because you could catch quite a few of them, whether barrel trauma issues or not. And I know we found them out on Mille Lacs Lake before, but then Mille Lacs, they weren't that deep, you know what I mean? The fish were in 17 to 25 foot of water, and you could catch them. But it's exactly what you said, and we noticed the same thing as you catch largemouth bass, really small profile baits. And the odd thing is, you catch one here, there might be 4 right around, but you have to cut 4 more holes to catch those fish. You have to cut a hole right here, then drop the line down right here, and the fish will only move this far to bite a bait, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those really small profile baits. A lot of people don't really think about bass as being panfish, but they really are. They're the largest of the panfish. You know what I mean? You think about it.
Yep. The other bait that I've just I've caught it's like the killer smallmouth bait in the spring is like a 16th ounce hair jig, a black hair jig. That is like my go-to largemouth bait. That thing just catches tons of largemouth, and it does catch smallmouth too. Just that real subtle marabou action through the ice can be super deadly for them. But I just don't spend a ton of time doing it.
Any advice for targeting walleyes in mesotrophic lakes?
Well, most walleye lakes are mesotrophic lakes. So I mean, Leech, Mille Lacs, the big classic lakes that we've got in Minnesota. So all of your classic presentations, a lot of people think that walleye are fish that really thrive in like super clean, clear waters. That's not the case. Walleyes really do well in more turbid mesotrophic systems. Like you think of, some of these, like Lac Sewell, which is probably one of the biggest walleye factories. Some of the best fishing in that lake is produced from, where a lot of this flow current is coming in. You look at Leech Lake, how it gets stirred up, and the water clarity in there. Another just tremendous walleye factory. The Lake of the Woods, the Southern Basin. Those are all relatively fertile systems, mesotrophic places. And when you look at eutrophic fisheries, those tend to be a lot more bass type of lakes where you see a lot more black bullheads, common carp, those type of species. But mesotrophic lakes are the #1 walleye producers in North America.
How is climate change impacting our Midwestern fisheries?
Obviously, any type of change is going to have some type of effect on our fisheries. I know that they're concerned about, at least in our walleye lakes, that they're being warming for too long a period of time where we're going to end up losing some of our Cisco and Tullaby populations, which are really critical for walleye populations. Will those turn into bass lakes into the not so distant future? I really don't know, you know what I mean? And how dramatic it is. You know, we're here in such a short period of time when you look in the grand scheme of things. You know, I don't know, really, to tell you the truth, and how it's cycling, how it's, you know, obviously, is it going to affect it? I don't know. It seems like it's such a weird question. I don't even know how to even answer it.
Yeah, I mean the trend has been warming. So in places, you know, as you see warming waters, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. We're seeing smallmouth bass, for example, really exploding in a number of fisheries, and there's of course numbers of variables that are contributing to that. But like you had mentioned, the big thing with warming water is some of the cold water species like Cisco's, whitefish. We're really at the southern edge of where lake whitefish live. Burbot, those type of fish tend to get squeezed and they get stressed during the warm water period. So a big portion of the food to grow the really big fish, those, you know, high caloric items like Cisco's, are really on the edge of being able to sustain the populations they've had. And Lake Superior, for example, they're concerned about the lake herring population there as well.
Read
so
that recently, yeah.
Yeah, so it's certainly there's winners and there's losers. It's not going to be the same as it used to was, as the phrase goes. But I think you're definitely seeing change. We're seeing, you know, a lot more. What I've noticed more than anything is the weather patterns tend to be more dramatic. The amount of water we've gotten recently, like our classic summer river bites that we love so much, and August, September, October, we've had, I don't know, I can't even tell you how many years in a row now the Mississippi's been almost flood stage. And in November here, one of our favorite places to fish from, you know, the southern end up to further up north. So we're just seeing things are definitely different, and they're, you know, in terms of fish, there's winners and there's losers.
It's sort of interesting when you think about it. I actually fished Sturgeon Bay, and I just came back from Saginaw Bay or Saginaw River, and about the last time I really went over there and fished, I fished a tournament over there in spring, and the water levels of the entire Great Lakes watershed is 3 to 4 feet higher than it was the last time I was there. That obviously is going to dramatically affect the location of those fish in those systems. We went over there this last spring. A lot of my coordinates that I have had for a number of successive years that were actually good to find the bass in that system were totally irrelevant. And you just wipe this lake clean. You just start fishing in completely different areas. The fish were, you know, you put 3 or 4 feet of water vertically. That's going to affect how those fish move up onto those shallow flats, and it's true for all different species. You know what I mean? What those water levels will be. You know, and is that associated to climate change? You know, it's a hard thing to say. They were actually at an all-time low not that long ago. They were 4 feet vertical lower.
How do you pinpoint roaming perch populations?
The interesting thing about perch are, because they are the fish of flats. And what I mean by that, most of the time people fish are used to structure fishing, and they're used to fishing edges and drop-offs and dramatic depth changes. Perch live on flats where it's flat, either the top of the flat or the bottom of the flat, but out on the flats. And they live in big, roving in these big groups of fish, and you have to be able to drop on them, you know what I mean? And it is sort of interesting because even even on Mille Lacs Lake, where we've seen our perch populations in more recent years, it seems like it's fell off pretty dramatically, but you get up on the tops of those big main lake mud flats, and you just catch one big perch here, and then you have to move a little bit distant, cut some more holes, and you catch one here. It's not like you're catching that big consistent. We used to catch a lot of them back to back.
Yeah.
There are still some number of really nice sized perch in there, but the way you fish them, you have to fish a little bit differently, because you just don't have the depth of the population. Because I know that you were up with on Leech last year ice fishing up there.
Yeah, it's changed so much. I mean, when I was a kid, you used to be able to go out to Mille Lacs and you could drill a hole up. You didn't have maps or anything, and sit on the tailgate of your truck and catch buckets full of fish. I grew up in southern Minnesota, and those are some of the biggest perch I've ever seen, just in duck sloughs. They would randomly get into these duck sloughs, and you could catch tons of them. Woman Lake, we've got a cabin right next door that used to be just a phenomenal perch fishery as well. So this doesn't really have a lot to do with finding them, but one of the things that's happened with perch populations is it appears as though we've had a decline in perch numbers throughout Minnesota. This isn't the Dakotas. However, it's not necessarily the case. The numbers are still there. However, perch, just like we see pike in a lot of these lakes, are maturing at a really young age. So when we used to have these populations of fish that were 8 to 12, 13, 14-inch fish that were relatively abundant, now those same fish are exhibited in really small numbers or small sizes. So the perch fishery in Minnesota, where I've got the most experience, has changed radically. But yes, when we would catch them, it would be often just drilling a lot of holes. I'm thinking of places on Leech Lake where the Cara flats, that sandgrass was a big deal. You'd find it wasn't a depth contour change, but it'd be a bottom contour change. So you'd have Cara and then it'd go to sand. So when you could find those edges, that's where an underwater camera, even some of these places you could see it with Google Earth, those would be big time highways for finding perch. And often it was bottom composition changes you could look at when you're fishing perch deeper in 25, 30 feet of water. It would be sand to mud and those types of areas. So it wasn't necessarily like you had mentioned, you're not necessarily fishing perch on an edge like this, but you're fishing perch on some type of a bottom composition change where there's a lot of zooplankton and different invertebrates that they're feeding on, and that's what they seem to eat most of the winter. So
it's true too. I know, because actually that's when I used to catch them both in spring and fall on Mille Lacs, and we used to fish them a lot. I used to bring my kids and my wife out and fish them. And even like in spring, you're fishing. It's weird. You fish in the Cara flats, and then where it transitions into the hard bottom area. So it's a little bit deeper. The weeds are, and then when you hit the hard bottom areas, it actually gets shallower, and you're fishing along those type of transitions.
Yep.
If you could only target one species for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, that's a no-brainer.
It is
Carp.
We'd have lots of opportunities to fish them all over the place.
That's right. I know. Well, that's what I thought of. At least I'm going for something that's really widely distributed.
Yeah, and they get big and they pull hard.
You
and
go for
really
smallmouths, and then you're limited walleyes, even a little bit more limited muskies.
Yeah,
I'm going for the most widely distributed creature.
If I could only do one thing for me, it would be fish muskies in Northwest Ontario. That's just like my favorite thing in the world to do. It's so different than fishing. I mean, it's hunting. You go to these big, vast wilderness areas and try to catch a giant fish. You're not catching lots of fish, but to me, it's like hunting a big white-tailed deer or something like that. Getting the opportunity to catch a big fish in the wilderness, to me, that's my favorite thing to do in fishing. So if I could do one thing, I would move up to Northwest Ontario and chase muskie.
I like the mix of all of them. I don't
so
like going for one species. I'm not going for that question. I don't want nothing to do with it.
The answer to the question generally is, what's your favorite thing to fish for, and it's what's ever biting. That's
exactly
what we do. We love to fish for everything.
That's what I like to fish
Variety
for.
is really fun. So, well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Ask the Edge. If you have questions, be sure to place them in the comments section below, because we need some more content for next week.